The wagon wheels creaked to a halt in front of the trading post, and Penelope Vance knew with a sickening certainty that her stepfather was about to sell her like livestock. She pressed her trembling hands against the rough wooden boards beneath her, trying to steady herself as Marcus Dalton climbed down from the driver's seat and disappeared inside the dusty building. It was August 1873 in Watsonville, California, and the summer heat made everything shimmer like a fever dream. But the cold dread in her chest felt sharp and real. She had known for weeks that this moment was coming. Ever since her mother died from consumption 3 months ago, Marcus had looked at her with calculating eyes, measuring her worth in dollars and cents. She was 19 years old, strong enough to work, pretty enough to fetch a good price, and completely alone in the world, except for this man who had never loved her even when her mother was alive. Now she was just another asset to be liquidated, traded away so he could afford passage back east and start over without the burden of a stepdaughter. The door of the trading post swung open and Marcus emerged with another man. Penelope's breath caught in her throat. The stranger was tall and lean, probably in his mid-20s, with sun-darkened skin and dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wore dusty trail clothes and a black hat pushed back on his head, and there was something in his bearing that suggested both strength and weariness. His eyes were a striking shade of green, and when they landed on her sitting in the wagon bed, she saw something flicker across his face that was not the greedy assessment she had expected. "That is her," Marcus said, jerking his thumb toward Penelope. "Strong, healthy, can cook and clean, worth every penny I'm asking." The stranger's jaw tightened. "You are selling a woman at a trading post like she is a saddle or a rifle." "I am trading her, actually," Marcus corrected, his voice slick with false civility. "For that sorrel mare you have got tied up, and that supply wagon. It is a fair deal. You get yourself a wife or a housekeeper, whatever you need, and I get transportation, and a good horse. Everybody wins." Penelope felt her face burn with humiliation, but she kept her chin up and her eyes forward. She would not cry. She would not give Marcus the satisfaction of seeing her break. The stranger was quiet for a long moment, and she could feel his gaze on her, studying her with an intensity that made her want to curl into herself and disappear. "What is your name?" The stranger called out to her suddenly, his voice cutting through the transaction like he was reminding everyone involved that she was a person who could speak. She turned to look at him directly, meeting those green eyes with all the dignity she could muster. "Penelope Vance, sir." "Penelope," he repeated, and something about the way he said her name, with respect and gentleness, made her throat tighten. He looked back at Marcus. "And she has agreed to this arrangement?" Marcus waved a dismissive hand. "She goes where I say. She is my stepdaughter, and I am her guardian. The law is on my side." "The law," the stranger said slowly, "also says a man should not treat another human being like property. But I suppose that is a finer point you have not bothered to consider." He was quiet again, and Penelope watched as he seemed to war with himself, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. Finally he sighed and looked up at her again. "Miss Vance, if I make this trade, you will not be a slave or property to me. You will be free to go your own way if you choose, or stay on at my ranch and work for fair wages. I give you my word on that." Something in his voice told her he meant it. There was a sincerity in his eyes that Marcus had never possessed, a fundamental decency that seemed out of place in this sordid transaction. She nodded slowly, not trusting her voice to remain steady if she tried to speak. The stranger turned back to Marcus. "I will make the trade, but understand this, Dalton. If I ever see you in this territory again, if I ever hear of you treating another soul the way you have treated this girl, I will make sure everyone from here to San Francisco knows exactly what kind of man you are. Do we have an understanding?" Marcus's face reddened, but he nodded curtly. The deal was struck with a handshake that looked more like a threat, and within minutes, papers were drawn up inside the trading post. Penelope climbed down from the wagon on shaking legs, taking only the small canvas bag that held her few possessions. 2 dresses, a shawl her mother had made, a book of poetry, and a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. The stranger unhitched his sorrel mare and handed the reins to Marcus, then helped transfer supplies from his wagon to the one Marcus had driven. Through it all, he did not speak to Penelope, but she caught him glancing at her several times, as if checking to make sure she was still there. still real. When everything was settled, and Marcus climbed onto the new wagon with the mare tied behind, he did not even look back at Penelope. He just snapped the reins and headed north out of town, leaving her standing in the dust with a man whose name she did not even know. The stranger watched Marcus disappear around the bend, then turned to her and removed his hat, holding it against his chest in a gesture that seemed almost old-fashioned in its courtesy. "My name is Fletcher Vaughn. I run a cattle ranch about 10 miles east of here, up in the foothills. I meant what I said before. You are not my property, Miss Vance. You are free to make your own choices." Penelope stared at him, trying to process the fact that her entire life had just changed in the span of 15 minutes. "Mr. Vaughn, I have nowhere to go. I have no money, no family, no prospects. If you are truly offering me work and a place to stay, I would be grateful to accept." Something like relief crossed his face. "Then let's get you out of this heat and somewhere you can rest. It has been a long day for both of us, I imagine." He had a sturdy buckskin gelding tied at the hitching post, and he helped her up into the saddle before swinging up behind her. The intimacy of the position made her stiffen, but his arm around her waist was careful and respectful, holding her steady without presumption. They rode through Watsonville and out into the rolling hills beyond, where golden grass stretched toward distant mountains and oak trees provided scattered shade. The landscape was beautiful in its stark summer dryness, and Penelope found herself breathing more easily as they left the town behind. "I apologize," Fletcher said after a while, his voice close to her ear, "for not intervening before the trade was made. I should have just paid the man off and sent him on his way. But the truth is, I needed that wagon he had. My old one broke an axle last week, and I have been trying to figure out how to transport supplies back to the ranch. When he made his offer, I was so shocked I did not know what to say. And then I saw you sitting there, trying so hard to be brave, and I just could not leave you with him." "You do not need to apologize," Penelope said quietly. "You did more than anyone else would have. Most men would have taken the deal and thought nothing of it. Most men should be ashamed of themselves then." She almost smiled at that. There was an earnestness to Fletcher Vaughn that was disarming. She had expected someone who would trade for a human being to be cruel, or at least callous, but he seemed genuinely troubled by the entire situation. They rode in silence for a while longer, and Penelope tried not to think about how solid and warm he felt behind her, or how his hand at her waist made her feel safer than she had in months. The ranch came into view as they crested a hill. It was a modest operation, with a sturdy wooden house, a large barn, several corrals, and a bunkhouse that looked recently repaired. Cattle grazed in the distance, and Penelope could see a vegetable garden near the house, though it looked somewhat neglected. Fletcher guided the horse toward the house and dismounted, then helped her down with the same careful courtesy he had shown before. "It is not much," he said, looking around as if seeing the place through her eyes. "I have been running it alone for about a year now, since my father passed. My mother died when I was young, and it has always been just the two of us. I do hire ranch hands during branding and roundup season, but mostly it is just me trying to keep everything from falling apart." Penelope looked at the house, at the garden, at the overwhelming evidence of a man struggling to do everything by himself. "It looks like a good, honest place," she said. "I meant what I said about working for my keep. I can cook, clean, mend clothes, tend a garden, preserve food. I am not afraid of hard work." Fletcher studied her for a moment, and she had the feeling he was seeing past the dirt and exhaustion to the person underneath. "I believe you," he said finally. "But for today, let's just get you settled. You can have my room. I will sleep in the bunkhouse." "I cannot take your room," Penelope protested. "Yes, you can. It is the right thing to do, and I will not hear any argument about it." His tone was gentle but firm, and Penelope found herself nodding. He led her inside, and she was struck by how clean everything was despite the obvious signs of a bachelor's dwelling. The furniture was simple but well made, and there were books on a shelf near the fireplace, which suggested Fletcher was educated beyond the average ranch hand. The bedroom was small but comfortable, with a real bed frame and mattress, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the hills. Fletcher set her bag down, and then seemed suddenly awkward, as if realizing for the first time that he had just brought a strange woman into his home. "I will give you some privacy," he said. "There is water in the pitcher and clean linens in the trunk at the foot of the bed. Take your time. I will be outside tending to the animals." He left quickly, closing the door behind him, and Penelope sank down onto the bed with a shaky exhale. She had been so focused on surviving the last few hours that she had not allowed herself to feel anything, but now the weight of it all crashed over her. She had been traded like property, separated from the only life she had known, and thrown into the care of a complete stranger. And yet, somehow, she did not feel as frightened as she should have. Fletcher Vaughn had kind eyes and a gentle manner, and he had already shown her more respect than Marcus ever had. Maybe, just maybe, this new life would not be the nightmare she had feared. She washed her face and hands in the basin, changed into her other dress, which was only slightly less travel-worn than the first, and tried to make herself presentable. When she finally emerged from the bedroom, she found Fletcher in the kitchen area, attempting to make coffee and failing somewhat spectacularly based on the frustrated expression on his face. "Let me," Penelope said, moving to the stove before she could second-guess herself. Fletcher stepped back gratefully, and she took over, finding the coffee grounds and starting the process properly. She also found some cornmeal and bacon, and before long, she had a simple but hearty meal cooking. Fletcher watched her work with something like wonder, and when she glanced at him, she caught him quickly looking away. They ate together at the small table, and the silence was surprisingly comfortable. Fletcher was not much of a talker, it seemed, but his presence was steady and calming. When the meal was finished, Penelope started to clear the dishes, but Fletcher stopped her with a hand on her arm. "You have had a hard day," he said. "Rest. The dishes can wait." "I need to keep busy," Penelope admitted. "If I sit still, I will start thinking too much." Fletcher nodded as if he understood that feeling all too well. "Then, how about I wash and you dry? We can work together." It was such a simple thing, standing side by side at the wash basin, cleaning dishes in the fading evening light. But there was something deeply intimate about it, too, a domesticity that Penelope had never experienced before. Marcus had never helped her mother with anything, viewing household tasks as beneath him. But Fletcher seemed to find nothing unusual about working alongside her, and the easy partnership felt like a gift she had not known she was missing. When the kitchen was clean, they moved outside to sit on the porch. The sun was setting over the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the air was finally cooling after the oppressive heat of the day. Penelope pulled her mother's shawl around her shoulders and breathed in the scent of grass and earth and distance. "Can I ask you something?" Fletcher said after a while, his voice careful. "You do not have to answer if you do not want to." "All right. Why did your stepfather treat you that way? What could make a man think it was acceptable to trade another human being?" Penelope was quiet for a long moment, trying to find the words. "Marcus never wanted me," she said finally. "He married my mother because she had a little money saved, and he thought she would be a good investment. When she got sick and all the money went to doctors and medicine, he started to resent her, and after she died, he just wanted to get rid of me so he could start over somewhere else. I think he saw the wagon and the horse as a way out, and I was just the currency he needed to make the deal." Fletcher's hands clenched into fists on his knees. "That man deserves to rot for what he did." "Maybe, but I am free of him now, and that is what matters." "You are right," Fletcher said, deliberately relaxing his hands. "And I promise you, Miss Vance, that as long as you are here, you will be treated with the respect and kindness you deserve. You are worth more than gold, more than any horse or wagon or piece of property. You are a human being with dignity and value, and I will not let anyone make you feel otherwise." The words, spoken with such quiet conviction, made Penelope's eyes sting with unexpected tears. She had not cried when Marcus made the deal, had not cried when he left her behind, but now, faced with this stranger's simple decency, she felt her composure crumbling. She turned her face away, not wanting Fletcher to see, but he must have noticed because he reached over and gently took her hand. "It is all right to cry," he said softly. "You have earned the right to feel whatever you are feeling." And so, she did cry, quietly, while Fletcher held her hand and did not try to fill the silence with empty platitudes. When the tears finally stopped, she felt somehow lighter, as if some of the weight she had been carrying had been washed away. She squeezed Fletcher's hand in silent thanks, and he squeezed back before letting go. "We should both get some sleep," he said, standing and offering her a hand up. "Tomorrow is going to be a full day. I need to ride into town for supplies, and if you are up for it, I could use your help making a list of what we need for the kitchen and the garden." "I can do that," Penelope said. "And Mr. Vaughn, thank you for everything." He smiled, and it transformed his whole face. making him look younger and less burdened. "Call me Fletcher, and you are welcome, Penelope. I am glad you are here." That night, Penelope lay in Fletcher's bed, surrounded by the faint scent of leather and sage that clung to the linens, and thought about the strange turn her life had taken. She had been so certain that being traded away would be the worst thing that could happen to her, but now she was beginning to wonder if maybe it was actually the beginning of something better. Fletcher Vaughn was a good man. She could feel that in her bones. And as she drifted off to sleep, she let herself imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to build a life here, in this quiet place with this quiet man who had already shown her more kindness than she had any right to expect. The next morning dawned bright and clear, and Penelope woke to the sound of roosters crowing and Fletcher moving around outside. She dressed quickly and went to the kitchen, where she found that Fletcher had already started a fire in the stove, but had left the actual cooking to her. She smiled at that small consideration and set about making breakfast. When Fletcher came in from his morning chores, he found eggs, biscuits, and coffee waiting for him, and the look of grateful surprise on his face made Penelope's heart warm. "You are going to spoil me," he said, sitting down at the table. "I am earning my keep," Penelope corrected, joining him. "Besides, it feels good to cook for someone who appreciates it." They ate together, and afterward, Penelope helped Fletcher make a list of supplies they needed. As she went through the pantry and the garden, she was struck by how much potential the place had. With a little care and attention, the garden could be thriving instead of merely surviving. The house could be truly comfortable instead of just functional. The ranch could be a home instead of just a place where Fletcher slept between long days of work. "You are thinking very seriously about something," Fletcher observed, watching her write down items on the list. "I am thinking about what this place could be," Penelope said honestly. "You have built something good here, Fletcher. It just needs someone to help you maintain it. Are you volunteering for the job?" "I am already doing the job. I am just making observations." Fletcher laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that made Penelope realize she had not heard him laugh before. She liked it. She liked the way his eyes crinkled at the corners and the way his shoulders relaxed. She liked that she had been the one to make him laugh. They rode into Watsonville together later that morning, with Fletcher driving the wagon Marcus had traded for and Penelope sitting beside him. She was nervous about going back to town, afraid of what people might say or think about her sudden change in circumstances. But Fletcher seemed to sense her anxiety, and he kept up a steady stream of conversation about the ranch, the cattle, the weather, anything to distract her from her worries. When they arrived at the general store, Fletcher helped her down from the wagon and then offered her his arm as they walked inside. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. He was claiming her, not as property, but as someone under his protection. The message was clear. Anyone who wanted to gossip about Penelope Vance would have to answer to Fletcher Vaughn. The store owner, a portly man named Mr. Henderson, greeted them with curiosity barely concealed behind politeness. "Fletcher, good to see you. And who is this young lady?" "This is Miss Penelope Vance," Fletcher said smoothly. "She is working at my ranch now, helping to manage the household. We have got quite a list of supplies to purchase if you have got the time." Mr. Henderson's eyebrows rose, but he was smart enough not to ask the questions that were clearly burning in his mind. Of course. Let me see that list." While Mr. Henderson gathered their supplies, Penelope wandered through the store, looking at fabrics and notions. She paused by a display of garden seeds, running her fingers over the packets and imagining what she could grow. Fletcher appeared at her elbow, startling her slightly. "See something you want?" he asked. "Just dreaming," Penelope said. "It is silly." "It is not silly. Tell me." She hesitated, then picked up a packet of tomato seeds. "I was thinking about the garden. If we plant these now, we could have tomatoes by late fall, and these bean seeds and these cucumbers. With some work, we could have enough vegetables to last through the winter, with plenty to preserve and sell." Fletcher took the seed packets from her hands and studied them. Then he walked over to the counter and added them to their order, along with several other packets Penelope had been admiring. "Consider it an investment," he said when she started to protest. "A good garden will save us money in the long run, and besides, you should have the tools you need to do your job properly." It was such a practical way of framing it, but Penelope saw through to the generosity underneath. Fletcher was giving her permission to put down roots, to invest in the ranch as if she had a stake in its future, and maybe she did. Maybe this was not just a temporary refuge, but the beginning of something permanent. They loaded the supplies into the wagon and headed back to the ranch. On the way, Fletcher told her stories about growing up in the area, about his father teaching him to rope and ride, about his mother's garden that had been the pride of the county before she died. Penelope listened, fascinated by this glimpse into Fletcher's past, and found herself sharing her own stories in return. She told him about her real father, who had died in a mining accident when she was 10. She told him about her mother's beautiful singing voice and how she had filled their small house with music. She told him about the books she loved and the dreams she had once had of becoming a teacher. "You still could," Fletcher said. "Become a teacher, I mean. There is a school in town, and I know they are always looking for qualified instructors." "I never finished my own schooling," Penelope admitted. "After my father died, there was no money for it, and Marcus certainly was not going to pay for me to get an education. Maybe we could change that. You could study on your own, take the teaching examination. I have got books at the house, and we could get more from town. If teaching is what you want, we should try to make it happen." Penelope looked at Fletcher, at his serious expression and earnest eyes, and felt something shift in her chest. This man, who barely knew her, was already invested in her happiness and her future. It was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Fletcher was quiet for a moment, guiding the horses around a bend in the road. "Because kindness should not be a rare commodity," he said finally. "Because you deserve better than what life has given you so far. And because, if I am being honest, having you at the ranch has already made my life better. The house feels like a home again. The meals are something to look forward to instead of just fuel. And I like talking to you, Penelope. I like hearing your thoughts and your stories. I like that you are not afraid to speak your mind. So I am being kind because it is the right thing to do, but also because I am selfish enough to want you to stay." Penelope's heart was racing. She did not know what to say to that, so she simply reached over and placed her hand over Fletcher's where it rested on the reins. He glanced at her, surprised, and then a slow smile spread across his face. They rode the rest of the way home in companionable silence, hands touching, and Penelope felt a tiny seed of hope beginning to take root in her heart. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Penelope woke early each morning and prepared breakfast while Fletcher tended to the animals. After they ate together, Fletcher would head out to work on whatever needed doing around the ranch while Penelope tackled the household chores. But it was not the drudgery she had expected. Instead, she found satisfaction in bringing order to the house, in coaxing the garden back to life, in preparing meals that made Fletcher smile. In the afternoons, when the heat was at its peak, they would often rest on the porch together. Sometimes Fletcher would read aloud from one of his books while Penelope mended clothes or shelled peas. Sometimes they would just talk, sharing stories and opinions and dreams. Penelope learned that Fletcher wanted to expand his herd, to build the ranch into something that could support a family. Fletcher learned that Penelope had always wanted to travel, to see the ocean and the mountains and everything in between. "The ocean is not that far from here," Fletcher said one day. "Maybe 8 or 10 miles west. We could ride out there sometime if you wanted." "Really?" Penelope's face lit up. "I have lived in California for 3 years, but Marcus never took us anywhere except church and the market." "Then we should definitely go. How about this Sunday? We could pack a lunch and make a day of it." Sunday came, bright and perfect, and they set out early in the morning with a basket of food and a sense of adventure. Fletcher rode his buckskin, and Penelope was mounted on a gentle bay mare that Fletcher said had been his mother's horse. They followed winding trails through the hills, and Fletcher pointed out landmarks and told stories about the area. Penelope drank it all in, hungry for this experience of freedom and beauty. When they finally crested a hill and she saw the ocean spread out before them, Penelope gasped. She had imagined it, of course, had read descriptions in books, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of it. The water stretched endlessly to the horizon, deep blue and sparkling in the sunlight, and the sound of the waves was like thunder and music combined. They made their way down to a small beach, and Penelope dismounted before Fletcher could even tie up the horses, running toward the water with her skirts hiked up around her knees. Fletcher laughed and followed more slowly, carrying the basket and blanket. He spread the blanket on the sand and then just watched as Penelope splashed in the shallow water, her face glowing with joy. She looked younger in that moment, less burdened, and Fletcher felt his heart constrict with an emotion he was not quite ready to name. "Come in," Penelope called to him, waving. "The water is cold, but it feels wonderful." Fletcher kicked off his boots and rolled up his pants, wading in to join her. The water was shockingly cold, and he yelped, which made Penelope laugh. She splashed him playfully, and without thinking, he splashed her back. Soon they were engaged in a full water fight, laughing and shouting like children, soaked to the skin and not caring at all. When they finally collapsed onto the blanket, breathless and dripping, Fletcher could not stop smiling. "I have not done anything like that since I was a boy," he said. "Thank you for bringing me here," Penelope said, her eyes shining. "This is the most wonderful day I have had in years." They ate their lunch on the beach, enjoying sandwiches and apples while watching the waves roll in. Penelope told Fletcher about a book she had read once, about sailors and distant lands and some great adventures. Fletcher told her about a cattle drive he had gone on with his father, about sleeping under the stars and feeling like the world was infinite and full of possibility. "Do you ever feel trapped?" Penelope asked suddenly. "By the ranch, I mean. Do you ever wish you could just leave and see what else is out there?" Fletcher considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," he admitted. "There are days when the work feels endless, and I wonder what my life would have been like if I had made different choices. But then I remember that the ranch is not a trap. It is a foundation. It is something solid I can build on. And lately," he paused, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Lately, I have been thinking that maybe the life I want is not somewhere else. Maybe it is right here, if I am brave enough to reach for it." Penelope held his gaze, feeling the electricity in the air between them. There was a question in Fletcher's eyes, an unspoken invitation that both thrilled and frightened her. She was not naive. She knew that the feelings growing between them were real and powerful. But she also knew that they had only known each other for a few weeks, and rushing into anything would be foolish. "Fletcher," she said softly, "I need you to know that I am grateful for everything you have done for me. You saved me from a terrible situation, and you have treated me with more kindness and respect than I ever expected. But I do not want you to feel obligated to me just because of how we met. If there is something developing between us, I want it to be real and honest, not based on guilt or pity." Fletcher reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her palm. "Penelope, I do not feel obligated to you. I feel lucky to know you. Every day you amaze me with your strength and your intelligence, and your capacity for joy despite everything you have been through. I think about you constantly. I worry about you. I want to make you smile. And I know it has only been a few weeks, but I also know that what I am feeling is not pity or guilt. It is something much more complicated and much more wonderful." Penelope's heart was pounding so hard, she was sure Fletcher must be able to hear it. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I was so afraid at first. Afraid that you might turn out to be like Marcus or worse. But you are nothing like him. You are good and kind and patient, and being with you makes me feel safe. More than safe. It makes me feel alive." Fletcher lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then, let's take our time," he said. "Let's get to know each other properly, and when we are both sure, when there is no doubt in either of our minds, then we can talk about what comes next." It was the perfect thing to say, and Penelope found herself leaning forward to press a soft kiss to Fletcher's cheek. He turned his head slightly, and their lips met in a kiss that was tentative and sweet and full of promise. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. They stayed at the beach until late afternoon, talking and walking along the shore, collecting shells and watching seabirds wheel overhead. On the ride back to the ranch, Penelope felt lighter than air, as if she might float right off the horse if Fletcher was not there to anchor her. They arrived home as the sun was setting, and after they tended to the horses, Fletcher pulled Penelope into his arms on the porch and kissed her again, deeper this time, with a passion that left them both breathless. "I am falling in love with you," Fletcher said against her hair. "I know it is too soon to say that, but it is the truth." "Then I will tell you a truth too," Penelope replied, pulling back to look into his eyes. "I am falling in love with you as well, and it terrifies me and excites me in equal measure. We will figure it out together," Fletcher promised. "Whatever comes, we will face it together." The weeks turned into months, and summer faded into fall. The garden Penelope had planted flourished, providing them with abundant vegetables that she preserved in jars for the winter. Fletcher hired a few ranch hands for the roundup, and Penelope found herself cooking for a small crew, enjoying the bustle and camaraderie. The ranch hands treated her with respect, partly because they could see how Fletcher looked at her, and partly because Penelope had a natural warmth that put people at ease. In October, Fletcher had to make a cattle drive to San Francisco to sell off some of the herd. He was gone for nearly 2 weeks, and Penelope discovered how much she had come to depend on his presence. The house felt empty without him, the meals less satisfying, the evenings long and lonely. When he finally returned, dusty and exhausted, she ran to meet him and threw herself into his arms without a second thought. "I missed you," she said fiercely. "Do not leave me alone that long again." Fletcher held her tight, his face buried in her hair. "I missed you every single day. I kept thinking about how you would laugh at something or what you would say about the people I met. You are always with me, Penelope, even when we are apart." That night, over dinner, Fletcher seemed nervous. He kept fidgeting with his fork and clearing his throat as if he wanted to say something, but could not find the words. Finally, Penelope set down her own fork and looked at him directly. "Just say whatever it is," she said gently. "You know you can tell me anything." Fletcher took a deep breath. "While I was in San Francisco, I had a lot of time to think, and I realized that I do not want to spend another day without knowing that you are mine and I am yours. I know we said we would take our time, and maybe this is too fast, but Penelope, I love you. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person, and I want to marry you if you will have me." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small garnet stone. "It was my mother's ring," he said. "My father gave it to me before he died and told me to save it for the woman I wanted to spend my life with. I cannot think of anyone more deserving than you." Penelope stared at the ring, tears streaming down her face. This man, who had bought her freedom with a horse and a wagon, who had treated her with unfailing kindness and respect, who had shown her what real love looked like, was offering her everything. His name, his home, his heart, his future. "Yes," she said through her tears. "Yes, Fletcher, I will marry you. I love you so much it frightens me sometimes, but I also trust you completely. You are the best man I have ever known, and I want nothing more than to be your wife." Fletcher slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had always been meant for her. They stood and came together in a kiss that was both tender and passionate, sealing their promise to each other. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. "When?" Penelope asked. "When should we get married?" "As soon as possible," Fletcher said. "I am tired of sleeping in the bunkhouse. I want to share my bed with my wife, to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night." Penelope blushed but nodded. "Then let's not wait. We can have a simple ceremony in town, just something to make it legal. I do not need anything fancy." "Are you sure? Most women want a big wedding with all the trimmings." "I am not most women, and I do not need a big celebration to know that what we have is real. All I need is you." They rode into Watsonville the next day and spoke to the minister at the church. He was a kind older man named Reverend Carlson, who asked them a few questions to make sure they were serious, and then agreed to perform the ceremony that coming Saturday. Penelope used some of the money Fletcher insisted on paying her for her work to buy fabric for a new dress. A simple but elegant creation in deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes. On Saturday morning, Penelope woke in Fletcher's room, where she had been sleeping since he proposed, though they had maintained proper boundaries. She dressed carefully, arranging her dark hair in a simple style, and pinning her mother's cameo brooch at her throat. When she emerged from the bedroom, Fletcher was waiting in his best suit, his hair neatly combed and his face freshly shaved. He looked devastatingly handsome, and the way he stared at her made Penelope feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. "You are breathtaking," he said hoarsely. "I am the luckiest man alive." They rode to town together, and the ceremony was held in the small church, with just a few witnesses. Mr. Henderson from the general store, Reverend Carlson's wife, and a couple of the ranch hands who had heard about the wedding and wanted to come. It was simple and quick, but when Fletcher said "I do" and slipped a matching gold band onto Penelope's finger, she felt the weight and significance of the moment. She was no longer Penelope Vance, the unwanted stepdaughter who had been traded away. She was Penelope Vaughn, beloved wife, partner, and equal. The kiss that sealed their marriage was met with applause and cheers from their small audience, and afterward there was cake and lemonade at the general store, a wedding gift from Mr. Henderson. People congratulated them warmly, and Penelope realized that she had been accepted into the community not as Fletcher's property or servant, but as his wife and a respected member of society in her own right. When they finally rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting everything in golden light. Fletcher helped Penelope down from the wagon and then, without warning, swept her up into his arms. "What are you doing?" she laughed, clinging to his shoulders. "Carrying my bride over the threshold," he said, grinning. "It is tradition." He carried her into the house and did not set her down until they were in the bedroom. Then he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with a reverence that made her heart ache. "I promise I will spend every day of the rest of my life making you happy," he said. "You are my everything, Penelope." "And you are mine," she replied, reaching up to undo the buttons of his shirt. "Now, stop talking and show me how much you love me." What followed was tender and passionate, a joining of not just bodies but souls. Fletcher was gentle with her, taking his time to learn what made her sigh and gasp, and Penelope gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, skin to skin, heartbeat to heartbeat, and Penelope felt a sense of profound peace. This was where she belonged. This was home. The months that followed were the happiest of Penelope's life. Winter came to the hills around Watsonville, bringing rain and cooler temperatures, and she and Fletcher settled into married life with surprising ease. They worked together during the day and held each other at night, and the ranch prospered under their joint care. The garden was prepared for spring planting, the animals were healthy and well tended, and the house became a true home filled with laughter and love. In March, Penelope began to suspect that she might be pregnant. Her monthly courses had stopped, and she was feeling tired and queasy in the mornings. She waited a few weeks to be sure before telling Fletcher, and when she finally shared the news over dinner one evening, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He leapt up from his chair, whooping with joy, and then dropped to his knees beside her to press his face against her still flat belly. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly. "You and me, we are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Penelope asked, running her fingers through his hair. "Happy does not even begin to cover it. I am ecstatic. I am terrified. I am overwhelmed. I am everything all at once." He looked up at her, his eyes bright with emotion. "Thank you, Penelope. Thank you for loving me, for marrying me, for giving me this gift. I swear I will be the best father I can possibly be." "I know you will," Penelope said softly. "You are already the best husband. Our child is lucky to have you." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through spring and into summer. Penelope's belly grew round and full, and Fletcher became even more protective of her, insisting she rest more and let him handle the heavier household tasks. She argued with him about it regularly, insisting she was pregnant, not fragile, but secretly she loved his attentiveness. He would talk to her belly at night, telling their unborn child stories about the ranch and making promises about the future. And Penelope would fall asleep feeling utterly cherished. In late September, as the summer heat was finally breaking, Penelope went into labor. Fletcher rode to town to fetch the midwife, an experienced older woman named Mrs. Chen, and then paced the floor anxiously while Penelope labored. The birth was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours, but finally, just before dawn, a baby's cry filled the house. "It is a boy," Mrs. Chen announced, handing the squalling infant to Penelope. A healthy, strong boy. Penelope looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and flailing fists, and felt a love so intense it nearly stopped her heart. Fletcher crowded close, his face streaked with tears, and together they marveled at the miracle they had created. The baby had Fletcher's dark hair and Penelope's delicate features, and when he opened his eyes, they were the same striking green as his father's. "What should we name him?" Fletcher asked, gently touching one tiny hand with his finger. The baby immediately grasped it, holding on with surprising strength. "I was thinking about your father," Penelope said. "What was his name?" Frank Vaughn." "Then let's call him Franklin for your father, and as a reminder that our son is free to be whoever he wants to be." Fletcher kissed her forehead. "Franklin Vaughn, it is perfect. He is perfect. You are perfect." The first few months of parenthood were exhausting but joyful. Franklin was a good baby for the most part, though he had powerful lungs when he wanted to be fed. Fletcher proved to be a devoted father, getting up in the night to bring the baby to Penelope for nursing, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours just holding his son and talking to him. Penelope would watch them together and feel her heart expand with love. As Franklin grew into a chubby, happy toddler, Penelope found herself pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. And in the summer of 1876, she gave birth to a daughter they named Ruth, after Penelope's mother. Ruth was a quieter baby than Franklin had been, with dark hair like her brother, but hazel eyes that seemed to shift between blue and green depending on the light. The ranch continued to prosper as their family grew. Fletcher expanded the herd and built a new barn, and Penelope started a small business, selling her preserved vegetables and baked goods in town. They hired a permanent ranch hand, a young man named Tom, who was hardworking and respectful, and who lived in the bunkhouse and helped Fletcher with the daily operations. Life was not without challenges. There were droughts that tested their resources, illnesses that frightened them, and the constant hard work that came with ranching and raising children. But through it all, Penelope and Fletcher faced everything together, their love deepening with each passing year. One evening in the fall of 1878, as they sat on the porch watching Franklin and Ruth play in the yard, Fletcher reached over and took Penelope's hand. "Do you remember the day we met?" he asked. "How could I forget? You traded a horse and a wagon for me at a trading post." "I have thought about that day so many times over the years," Fletcher said quietly. "And I always come back to the same conclusion. You were worth so much more than what I traded. You were worth more than gold, more than anything in the world. And every day since then, you have proven that truth over and over again." Penelope squeezed his hand, feeling tears prick her eyes. "You saved me that day, Fletcher, not just from Marcus, but from a life without hope or love or meaning. You saw me as a person when everyone else just saw a commodity. You gave me a home, a family, a future. I think I got the better end of that deal. Then we will just have to agree that we both got exactly what we needed," Fletcher said, pulling her close. "Each other." As the sun set over the hills and their children's laughter filled the air, Penelope reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had been traded like property, treated as if she had no value beyond what someone might pay for her. But Fletcher had seen her true worth, had recognized that she was a person deserving of love and respect and dignity, and in seeing her that way, he had given her the courage to see herself the same way. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and milestones. Franklin grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working alongside his father on the ranch. Ruth was spirited and independent, always getting into mischief but with a heart of gold. In 1880, Penelope gave birth to another son, whom they named Samuel, and 2 years later, a second daughter named Alice joined the family. The house that had once been too quiet and empty was now filled with noise and chaos and laughter. There were skinned knees to bandage and squabbles to mediate and endless loads of laundry to wash. But there was also tremendous joy, family dinners around the table, storytelling by the fireplace, riding lessons in the corral, and the deep satisfaction of watching their children grow and thrive. Penelope did eventually pursue her dream of teaching. When Ruth was old enough to start school, Penelope began tutoring some of the local children in reading and mathematics, working with them in the afternoons at the ranch house. She never did take the formal examination to become a certified teacher, but she found that the informal arrangement worked well for everyone involved. The children learned, their parents were grateful, and Penelope got to share her love of learning with the next generation. Fletcher's ranch became one of the most respected operations in the area, known for quality cattle and honest dealings. He was elected to the local Cattlemen's Association and became an advocate for fair practices and sustainable ranching methods. People sought his advice and valued his opinion, and Penelope was proud of the reputation he had built through hard work and integrity. In the spring of 1885, Marcus Dalton unexpectedly appeared in Watsonville. He was older, more worn, and clearly down on his luck. He came to the ranch one afternoon while Fletcher was out checking on the herd, and when Penelope opened the door and saw him standing there, her blood ran cold. "Hello, Penelope," Marcus said, attempting a smile that looked more like a grimace. "It has been a long time." "Not long enough," Penelope replied coldly. "What do you want?" "I heard you have done well for yourself, married that cowboy, had some children, built a nice life. I was thinking maybe you could spare a little money for your old stepfather, for old time's sake." Penelope felt anger rise in her throat, hot and bitter. "You sold me, Marcus. You traded me for a horse and a wagon like I was livestock. And now you have the audacity to show up here and ask me for money?" "I was down on my luck," Marcus whined. "You cannot hold a grudge forever." "I can, and I will. You need to leave my property right now before my husband comes back and deals with you the way you deserve." Marcus's face hardened. "You always were an ungrateful girl. Your mother would be ashamed." "My mother would be ashamed of you," Penelope shot back. "She would be horrified by what you did. Now get off my land before I get the rifle." Marcus left, muttering under his breath, and Penelope watched until he was out of sight before closing the door and leaning against it, shaking. When Fletcher came home an hour later, she told him what had happened, and he immediately rode into town to make sure Marcus had left the area. The sheriff confirmed that Marcus had been seen heading north, and Fletcher made it clear that if he ever showed his face in Watsonville again, he would be arrested for trespassing. That night, as Penelope lay in Fletcher's arms, she realized that seeing Marcus had not hurt the way she thought it would. He had no power over her anymore. He was just a bitter, broken man who had made terrible choices and was living with the consequences. She, on the other hand, had built a beautiful life filled with love and purpose. She had won in every way that mattered. "I am proud of you," Fletcher murmured into her hair, "for standing up to him, for refusing to let him make you feel small. You are the strongest person I know, Penelope Vaughn." "I am only strong because I have you," she replied. "We make each other stronger." The children grew older, each developing their own personalities and dreams. Franklin, at 15, was already talking about taking over the ranch someday, working alongside his father with a dedication that made both parents swell with pride. Ruth, at 13, had declared she wanted to be a doctor, which was almost unheard of for a woman, but Penelope and Fletcher encouraged her ambitions. Samuel, at 9, was the dreamer of the family, always sketching pictures and making up stories. And Alice, at 7, was a bundle of energy and mischief who kept everyone on their toes. In 1890, Penelope and Fletcher celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. The children helped plan a surprise party, inviting neighbors and friends from town. As Penelope looked around at the crowded house, at the people who had become like family, at her children laughing, and Fletcher standing beside her with his arm around her waist, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That night, after the guests had left and the children were in bed, she and Fletcher sat on the porch, as they had done so many times over the years. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the air was warm with the promise of summer. 15 years, Fletcher said, shaking his head in wonder. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together." "I prefer to think we have always been together," Penelope said. "Even before we met, we were just two halves waiting to find each other." "That is poetic," Fletcher teased gently. "Ruth is not the only one with big dreams. Maybe you should write a book." "Maybe I will someday. I could call it The Woman Who Was Worth More Than Gold." Fletcher pulled her close and kissed her temple. "You are worth more than all the gold in California. You always have been. From the very first moment I saw you sitting in that wagon, trying so hard to be brave, I knew then that you were someone special. I am just grateful that I was smart enough to see it." "You did more than see it, Fletcher. You believed it, and you made me believe it too. You gave me back my sense of self-worth when I thought it was gone forever. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the stars and listening to the sounds of the night. After a while, Fletcher spoke again. "Do you ever think about how different your life could have been if someone else had made that trade, or if Marcus had taken you somewhere else?" "Sometimes," Penelope admitted, "but I try not to dwell on it. The truth is I was in a terrible situation, and you pulled me out of it. You could have been cruel or indifferent, but instead, you were kind. You saw my humanity when others only saw an object to be used, and that made all the difference." "I wish I could go back and tell that younger version of myself how right I was to make that trade," Fletcher said. "I wish I could tell him that the woman in the wagon was going to become his whole world, the center of everything good and true in his life. But I suppose he will figure it out soon enough." Penelope laughed softly. "We figured it out together. That is what makes it so special." The years rolled on, bringing the usual mix of joys and sorrows. There were birthdays and holidays, harvests and hard times, moments of triumph and periods of struggle. Franklin did indeed take over much of the ranch operations as he grew into manhood, proving himself to be as capable and honorable as his father. Ruth left home at 18 to attend medical college in San Francisco, one of only a handful of women in her class. Samuel discovered a talent for carpentry and began apprenticing with a builder in town. Alice, the baby of the family, showed an aptitude for business and started helping her mother with the preserves and baking enterprise. In 1895, Franklin married a sweet girl named Margaret from a neighboring ranch, and the following year, they gave Penelope and Fletcher their first grandchild, a boy named William. Holding her grandson for the first time, Penelope thought about how far she had come from that frightened girl in the wagon. She had not just survived, she had flourished. She had built a legacy of love and family that would continue long after she was gone. One evening in the late fall of 1898, as Penelope and Fletcher sat on their porch watching the sunset, Fletcher turned to her with a serious expression. "I have been thinking about something, and I want to know what you think." "That sounds ominous," Penelope teased. "What is it?" "We have had such a good life together, built something really special, and I want to make sure that when we are gone, the ranch stays in the family. I was thinking we should draw up formal papers, making sure everything is divided equally among the children, so there is never any question or conflict." Penelope nodded thoughtfully. "That is a good idea. We should also write down our story, I think. The real story of how we met and fell in love. I want our grandchildren and great-grandchildren to know that love can come from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best." "You should write it," Fletcher said. "You have always had a way with words, and besides, it is really your story more than mine. You are the one who survived, who overcame, who transformed a terrible situation into something beautiful." "It is our story," Penelope corrected firmly. "I could not have done any of it without you. You were the one who saw my worth when no one else did. You were the one who gave me a chance to become who I was meant to be." Fletcher kissed her hand, his eyes soft with emotion. "Then we will write it together, just like we have done everything else." And so they did. Over the following months, Penelope and Fletcher worked together to document their story, from that fateful day at the trading post through all the years of their marriage. They wrote about the challenges they had faced, the joys they had shared, and the love that had sustained them through it all. When they were finished, they had a complete record of their lives together, a testament to the power of kindness, respect, and genuine affection. The document was placed in a locked box along with other important family papers to be passed down through the generations. Penelope included a note at the end: "To whoever reads this in the future, know that every person has intrinsic worth and dignity, regardless of their circumstances. We all deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. May you always remember that the measure of a person is not in what they cost, but in who they are." The new century arrived, bringing with it changes and challenges. The world was modernizing rapidly, with new inventions and ideas transforming daily life. But on the Vaughn Ranch, some things remained constant: the rhythm of the seasons, the importance of family, and the enduring love between Penelope and Fletcher. By 1905, they had 6 grandchildren and were approaching their 30th wedding anniversary. Ruth had become a successful doctor in San Francisco, advocating for women's health and education. Samuel had his own carpentry business and was married with 2 children. Alice had married a banker from Salinas and was using her business acumen to help run his operations. And Franklin and Margaret had 4 children and were successfully managing the ranch with Fletcher's guidance. On their 30th anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house was bursting with people, 3 generations of Vaughns filling every room with noise and laughter and love. Penelope moved through the crowd, hugging her children and grandchildren, marveling at how much her family had grown. During the dinner, Franklin stood up to make a toast. "Mom, Dad, I want to thank you for everything you have taught us. You have shown us what real love looks like, what true partnership means, and how to build a life based on respect, hard work, and integrity. Your marriage has been the foundation of this family, and we are all better people because of your example. Happy anniversary, and here is to many more years together." Everyone raised their glasses, and Penelope felt tears streaming down her face. She looked at Fletcher, who was also crying unashamedly, and they smiled at each other through their tears. They had done it. They had built a life worth living, a family worth cherishing, a legacy worth leaving. That night, after everyone had gone to bed or left for their own homes, Penelope and Fletcher walked out to the place where the garden used to be. It had been expanded over the years and was now a proper orchard, with apple and pear trees that provided fruit for the whole family. The moon was full, casting silver light over everything, and the air was sweet with the scent of ripening apples. "Do you remember planting these trees?" Penelope asked, leaning against Fletcher's shoulder. "I do. Ruth was just a baby, and Franklin wanted to help, but mostly just got in the way. You said that the trees would be here long after we were gone, providing fruit for our grandchildren and their children. And you were right. I am glad we built something lasting," Penelope said. "Not just the ranch, but a family that understands what really matters. Love, respect, kindness. Those are the things that endure." Fletcher turned her to face him, cupping her face in his weathered hands. The moonlight caught the silver in his hair and the lines around his eyes, marks of a life well lived. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Penelope Vaughn. 30 years ago, I traded a horse and a wagon for you, and it was the smartest decision I ever made. You were worth more than gold then, and you are worth more than gold now. You always will be." Penelope kissed him, a kiss that contained 30 years of love and devotion, of shared struggles and shared triumphs, of a partnership that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. "And you, Fletcher Vaughn, gave me everything I did not even know I needed: a home, a family, a sense of purpose, and most importantly, a love that has never wavered. I would not change a single moment of our life together." They stood there in the moonlight, holding each other close, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and had built a love that would last forever. The world around them might change, might modernize and transform, but the feeling of being completely known and completely loved, this would endure. The years continued their steady march forward. Penelope and Fletcher aged gracefully, their hair turning silver, their movements slowing, but their love remaining as strong as ever. They watched their grandchildren grow up, some staying in the area to help with the ranch or pursue their own dreams, others leaving to seek their fortunes in the cities. They welcomed great-grandchildren into the family, tiny bundles of possibility who represented the future. In 1910, Fletcher developed a persistent cough that worried everyone. The doctor diagnosed him with lung trouble, likely from years of working in the dusty conditions of the ranch. He was prescribed rest and medicine, but Penelope knew her husband well enough to see that he was declining. Fletcher, ever practical, made sure all his affairs were in order, and spent his remaining energy making sure Penelope would be well cared for. "I am not leaving you," Penelope told him fiercely one evening as they lay in bed together. "If you think you are going somewhere without me, you are mistaken." Fletcher managed a weak smile. "I am not going anywhere just yet. I have too much to live for. Besides, I made you a promise 35 years ago to spend the rest of my life making you happy. I intend to keep that promise as long as I possibly can." And he did. Despite the doctor's grim prognosis, Fletcher rallied. The lung trouble did not go away, but it stabilized, and with careful management and Penelope's devoted care, he regained much of his strength. By the following spring, he was back to light duties around the ranch, stubbornly insisting he was not ready to be put out to pasture just yet. "You are the most stubborn man I have ever known," Penelope told him fondly. "I learned from the best," Fletcher replied, kissing her forehead. "You survived being traded like property and turned it into an opportunity for a better life. If that is not stubborn, I do not know what is." They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1915, surrounded once again by their extensive family. By now, there were 8 grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren, with more on the way. The ranch was thriving under Franklin's management, and the Vaughn name was synonymous with quality and integrity throughout the region. During the celebration, Ruth stood up to speak. She was now a respected doctor and advocate for women's rights, and she commanded attention when she spoke. "I want to tell you all something about my parents that you might not know. When I was growing up, I used to hear whispers about how they met, about the unusual circumstances of their marriage. Some people thought it was scandalous, that there was something improper about the whole situation. But as I got older and learned the full story, I realized that what my parents did was revolutionary. My father saw a woman being treated as property and refused to accept it. He bought her freedom and then gave her the choice to determine her own future. And my mother took that opportunity and built an extraordinary life. Together, they showed that love is not about ownership or control, but about partnership and mutual respect. They taught us that every person has inherent dignity and worth. That lesson has shaped who I am and how I practice medicine. It has made me an advocate for those who cannot advocate for themselves. So, thank you, Mom and Dad, for being ahead of your time and for showing us a better way to live. The room erupted in applause, and Penelope found herself crying yet again. She had cried more happy tears in her life with Fletcher than she had ever thought possible. He squeezed her hand and whispered in her ear, "Our children turned out pretty well, did they not?" "They turned out magnificently," Penelope agreed, "just like their father." The years of the Great War came and went, bringing worry and sorrow even to their remote corner of California. Samuel's oldest son enlisted and served overseas, returning home changed but whole. The family gathered around him, providing the love and support he needed to readjust to civilian life, and eventually he was able to resume his normal activities. In 1920, Penelope and Fletcher celebrated their 45th anniversary more quietly, with just their children and a few close friends. They were both in their 70s now, and while they were still relatively healthy, they tired more easily and preferred quiet evenings at home to large gatherings. One night, as they sat together on the porch swing Fletcher had built years ago, watching the stars come out, Penelope said, "If I could go back to that day at the trading post, knowing everything that would happen, I would not change a single thing." Fletcher looked at her in surprise. "Not even the part where you were traded like property? That was terrifying and humiliating for you." "It was," Penelope agreed. "But it also led me to you, and that makes everything worth it. Besides, I think sometimes we have to go through dark times to fully appreciate the light. If my life had been easy, maybe I would not have valued what we have built together as much. Maybe I would have taken it for granted. But because I know what the alternative looks like, I treasure every moment we have had." Fletcher pulled her close, and they sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the night and feeling the deep contentment that comes from a life well lived. They had been through so much together, hardship and triumph, loss and joy, challenge and celebration. But through it all, their love had been the constant, the foundation upon which everything else was built. As they sat there, Penelope thought about all the women who had been and still were in situations like hers had been. Women who were treated as property, who were denied their basic human dignity, who were told they had no value beyond what someone would pay for them. She thought about how one person's kindness, one person's willingness to see beyond social norms and recognize shared humanity, could change everything. "What are you thinking about?" Fletcher asked, sensing her pensive mood. "I am thinking about how one moment, one choice, can alter the entire trajectory of a life. You chose to see me as a person instead of property. That single choice created this entire beautiful life we have had together. It makes me wonder how many other lives could be changed if more people made those kinds of choices." "The world would be a better place," Fletcher agreed, "but we cannot change the whole world. All we can do is live according to our principles and hope that our example influences others. And through our children and grandchildren, our values will continue. That is our legacy, Penelope. Not just the ranch or the money or the land, but the way we chose to live and love." "It is a good legacy," Penelope said softly. "I am proud of it. I am proud of us." They continued to sit together as the night deepened, two souls intertwined so completely that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. They had started as strangers, brought together by the worst of circumstances, but they had forged a love that transcended everything. It was a love built on mutual respect, genuine affection, unwavering support, and the daily choice to honor and cherish each other. In the spring of 1923, as the fruit trees were blooming and the world was coming back to life after winter, Fletcher passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 78 years old and had lived a full, rich life. Penelope woke that morning to find him still beside her, looking peaceful and finally free from the pain that had been plaguing him in recent months. She did not cry right away. Instead, she held his hand and talked to him, thanking him for 50 years of love and partnership, promising him that she would be all right, telling him that she would see him again someday. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half the county. Fletcher had been respected and loved, known for his fairness, his integrity, and his devotion to his family. People came from miles around to pay their respects, and every one of them had a story about how Fletcher had helped them or shown them kindness. After the funeral, as the family gathered at the ranch, Penelope found herself surrounded by love and support. Her children were attentive, her grandchildren solicitous, her great-grandchildren a source of comfort with their innocent presence. But nothing could fill the Fletcher-shaped hole in her heart. They had been together for so long, had been so attuned to each other, that his absence felt like missing a vital part of herself. In the weeks that followed, Penelope moved through her days in a haze of grief. She knew intellectually that Fletcher had lived a long life, that he had died peacefully, that she should be grateful for all the years they had together. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were two different things. She missed him with an intensity that sometimes took her breath away. Ruth, who had moved back to Watsonville after her husband's death the previous year, came to stay with her mother. Together, they established a new routine, finding comfort in each other's company and in the daily rituals of living. Ruth encouraged Penelope to talk about Fletcher, to share memories and stories, and slowly, the sharp edges of grief began to soften into something more bearable. One day, several months after Fletcher's death, Penelope was going through some old papers when she came across the manuscript she and Fletcher had written years ago, documenting their story. She read through it, tears streaming down her face, marveling at the journey they had shared. At the end, she picked up a pen and added one final entry. That Fletcher Vaughn passed away on April 15, 1923, at the age of 78. He was my husband, my partner, my best friend, and the love of my life. For 50 years, he showed me every single day what true love looks like. He honored his promise to spend his life making me happy, and he succeeded beyond measure. I miss him with every fiber of my being, but I am also profoundly grateful for the time we had together. He taught me that I was worth more than gold, and in doing so, he gave me the greatest gift anyone can give another person, the gift of knowing one's own value. I will love him until my last breath, and beyond. Our story began with a trading post transaction, but it became an epic tale of love, respect, partnership, and devotion. I would not trade a single moment of it for anything in the world. Penelope Vaughn, September 1923. She closed the manuscript and placed it back in the box with the other important family documents. Someday, long after she was gone, someone would find it and read it, and they would know that love is possible even in the most unlikely of circumstances, that one person's kindness can change everything, and that the true measure of worth is not in what we cost, but in who we are and how we love. Penelope lived for another 5 years after Fletcher's death. She remained active and engaged, spending time with her family, tending a small garden, and advocating for women's rights and social justice in her community. She often spoke about her own experience, using her story to illustrate why every person deserves dignity and respect. In the fall of 1928, at the age of 75, Penelope became ill with pneumonia. Despite the best efforts of Ruth and the other doctors, she did not recover. On a crisp October evening, surrounded by her children, she passed away peacefully. Her last words were, "Tell Fletcher I am coming home." The family buried Penelope next to Fletcher, on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The headstone read, "Fletcher and Penelope Vaughn. He said she was worth more than gold. She proved him right every day." The ranch remained in the family for generations, passed down from parent to child, a testament to what Fletcher and Penelope had built. And their story, carefully documented and preserved, became a family legend, told and retold to each new generation. It served as a reminder that love can emerge from the darkest circumstances, that kindness can change lives, and that every person has inherent worth and dignity regardless of how they are treated by others. Years later, one of Penelope's great-great-granddaughters, a writer and historian, published the manuscript as a book. It became a bestseller, touching hearts around the world with its message of hope, redemption, and the transformative power of love. People read about the woman who was traded for a horse and a wagon, and the cowboy who recognized her worth, and they were inspired to look at their own lives differently, to treat others with more kindness, to believe in the possibility of love even in the most unlikely circumstances. And so, the legacy of Fletcher and Penelope Vaughn lived on, not just in their descendants, but in the hearts and minds of everyone who heard their story. It was a reminder that our worst moments do not define us, that love can heal even the deepest wounds, and that sometimes the most valuable things in life cannot be bought or sold. They can only be recognized, cherished, and allowed to grow into something beautiful and enduring. In the end, Fletcher had been right that day at the trading post in Watsonville, California in 1873. Penelope was worth more than gold. She was worth more than any price that could be assigned to her. And together, they had proven that when two people commit to seeing and valuing each other's true worth, they can create something that transcends time, circumstance, and even death itself. They can create a love story for the ages.